What is good, everybody? Hello, hello. Oh my goodness. This is sort of impromptu, but I was sharing with somebody. We were on a wellness call, and many topics were covered and coming up during this call, but particularly relationships came up. So we're doing another relationship message. I know we just did one the other day, but I made a comment that a particular person wrote down because apparently it was a mind-blowing moment. But essentially, when we're in relationships, oftentimes we're dealing with people's representative and not the person themselves. So I want to break down what I mean by that and then also offer some practical wisdom that you can consider when you approach your relationship. I really am right now focusing on the advice will be more so for intimate type relationships, but think about somebody acting as a representative, whether that's in a work environment, whether that's in an intimate relationship, no matter who it is. This is what I mean by that. When you think about relationships, typically you have 6 different layers, if you want to look at it that way, that you're working through. You have who the person is, who the person is behaving as, and who the person is doing work to be perceived as. Okay. So what they're doing to make sure they're perceived in a certain light. So there's 3 layers there. And then you have the other person that's doing the same thing, who they actually are, how they're showing up, and how they are working to be perceived. Okay. So a lot of times, for example, the person that we see on social media is a representative of the actual person. Okay. Or a lot of times when we're in dating relationships specifically, the person that you're seeing for the first 3 months or even up to a year is the representative. You're not seeing the full person because we're all really great actors. We're actually trained to be. We're trained specifically by social media, but also culture to show up in some kind of way. We really absorb things that are popular, things that are trendy, and we can be chameleons. We can morph into what's expected of us, right? So it is really, really, really important. It's actually imperative. It is vital, if freedom is a necessity to you, to really examine how rooted in your identity are you. Now, if you're a believer, who the sun sets free is free indeed. So if you are rooted in your identity in Christ and living from that, you can usually use a lot of wisdom and discernment in relationships that otherwise you might not have the capacity to access. So that's really, really important. But regardless, it is so, so important to know who you are so that you are not going to be easily moved. You're not going to just shift and morph and just adapt to what's around you. Being a people pleaser is a really good example of how you can actually work yourself out of your identity. You show up to be useful. You show up to fit a gap. You show up to make sure others are good, and you lose yourself. And you actually have an identity crisis a lot of the time. Or career and achievement can set us down that path also. And then if something shifts where you don't have that career anymore, or you don't have that athletic outlet, or whatever it is, whatever you've been putting all of your time, energy, and resource into, if that thing shifts, then suddenly you have an identity crisis. So it is really, really important to understand, are you more often presenting your representative? Are you showing up vulnerably, authentically, transparently? It requires work. Both of them require work. But when you think about the outcomes, what are the outcomes that you're after? So for example, if you practice a lot of secrets, a lot of hiding, a lot of projecting a certain image that actually is not a reflection of who you are, there will be a lot of insecurity. There will be a lot of self-doubt. There will be a lot of unrest, because your soul knows when what you are projecting is not truth. You can't be at peace with that, right? And that's going to require you to keep the image, right? You're just going to work to keep the image. So that's its own level of work. And it's not going to ultimately, if you are after really real and genuine connections, it's not going to bring about that outcome, because what you sow, you will reap, right? So if you are hiding and keeping secrets, you'll likely attract somebody else that's doing the same thing. Now, on the flip side, it requires work to be rooted in your identity, to be self-reflective, to be aware, to use discernment, to use wisdom, and to really understand, am I being vulnerable? Am I being transparent? Am I being authentic? How can I be more of those things? How can I be more courageous? How can I be more bold? How can I express authentically who I am and get better at doing that? Even at the risk of not being accepted, not being approved of, not being celebrated, whatever, right? That will still make sure that I'm free. Because at least that I showed up and I did what I was called to do. I did what I was inspired to do. I moved out of love and out of truth and out of sincerity and a real genuine effort, right? Which one do you want to work for? It's up to you. It just really depends on the outcomes that you want. Because if you sow authenticity, you will have really authentic people come into your life too. A really great experience. But I just wanted to highlight that because a lot of times we will be in relationships and we will be blindsided, quote unquote, because we miss the red flags. We don't recognize that somebody is showing us a representative. A really great way to see this is they look good on paper, but their character does not match that. Or they say a lot of the right things, but somehow their behavior is not lining up, right? So we'll always have the red flags. Now, whether you pay attention to them, that's going to be on you, and you will have to work with the consequences of whatever you choose. But it's really important to understand that all of us are capable of representing an identity that's not actually authentic, that's not actually true, that's not actually real. And a lot of times we deal with representatives, not actual people. So get wisdom, get understanding to really help you assess, is this really what I want? Because if you know in your soul, especially early in a relationship, that it's not lining up, that something's off, that doesn't just get better. You can't tell yourself enough stories. You can't make up enough excuses to accommodate that or to allow for that or to tolerate that and still be happy. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So now that we got that layer out of the way, here are a couple things to think about when you consider relationship to bring a different element of honor and respect and balance into it. So number one would be schedule specific dates to talk about your relationship. Now, I know that I do this personally when I have fear creep up, when stress is creeping up, when worry, when something is creeping up, some sort of concern is creeping up that I'm like, oh man, rather than being moved by it and overwhelmed by it, I schedule times to actually come up with creative solutions or to feel what that feels like or to actually work it out so that it doesn't derail my whole day, week, month, whatever, right? So similar to that, schedule dates to talk about your relationship. It is never fun in a relationship, no matter which side of the equation that you're on, when somebody says we need to talk. We want to run when we hear that. We want to avoid. We don't want to address. Sometimes, depending on where you are at maturity-wise, we can handle it. We can deal with it. It's all good. But a lot of the time, that's not a fun thing to hear. So if you have a set time where you're going to talk about it, you can bring all of your issues to the table and you can get a lot of the emotion out of it so that you can have a very real and graceful conversation. So schedule dates to talk about your relationship. That would be one thing. Number two would be candid about your feelings. The good, the bad, the ugly. What is not fun is if you suppress everything, if you just let it bottle up, it makes you very volatile. It makes you very difficult to read. And it's also really uncomfortable for another person because they can't really be intimate. They can't get close. They can't build understanding, right? They can't really relate to somebody that's not open, right? So be candid about it all. Make sure that you're just not bottling it up. Let it out, right? That is really, really important. And a lot of times when you let out something, when it's no longer in the darkness, when you bring it to the light, it no longer has that power to hold you back. And oftentimes it brings you closer as a couple when you can discuss these issues together. So for example, there was a woman that was pregnant, about to be a new mom, and she was noticing that there was distance being created with her partner. And that was new, different. That's not typical of the relationship to date. And so she gave herself a timeout, so to speak, to really examine what was going on, to feel what she was feeling. and not just lash out on her partner. And then later they were able to talk about it. And what she came to realize was that she was having fears coming up about being a new mom. Am I ready for the weight of this? What does that mean that I'm going to have to sacrifice? How will that change me as a woman, as a partner, right? How will that change the dynamic of my relationship? All of these things came up. But once she realized that, she was able to bring that to their partner. They were able to talk about it, and they were able to grow closer and actually create something very powerful because they talked about it and they set really solid intention. So huge. Be candid about what you're feeling, the good, the bad, right? You're a whole person. You're not just programmed to be one emotion all of the time. You're meant to feel the whole spectrum, right? So that's number 2. Number 3, figure out, just really identify what the reoccurring issues are in the relationship and then decide to do something about them. Because it's the little, right? The little foxes that spoil the vine, right? So you don't want these little things to be lingering that are eroding and destructing your relationship. The best thing to do is identify what those are so that you can address them and find solutions to handle that. So for example, if you are both in a very busy season, schedule date nights and schedule a consistent day that you guys know that you're not going to be on your cell phones, that you're not going to be available, that if something comes up, you're not going to schedule it in that window. It's going to have to go on another time. Like, this is a block dedicated to exactly what you guys need, which is investing in quality time together, for example, right? So if a reoccurring issue is lack of communication, right, then you could go back to that last one. Schedule a time where you guys just communicate. Maybe that's like a weekly day where you guys work out together and walk around, I don't know, some beautiful hiking trail or something where you're also able to talk, because being out in nature does something to you. And you usually can have a way more productive conversation than just sitting at a table. So think about that. Have some way to deal with these reoccurring issues, but actually do something about it. Don't let them linger. Okay? Number 4, don't expect your partner to be your best friend for life, your best friend forever. So what I mean by that is that we really expect so much of our partners. We almost make them idols, and that's when stuff gets really wacky, right? Like, we want our partner to be our best friend, our confidant, our co-parent, our companion, our this, our that, and it sets us up to be disappointed because a person is bound to disappoint us. They can't always match our expectations and what it is that we need and want every minute of the day. They cannot fulfill our needs. Really, it's only God that can do that. So you really want to make sure that you have a relationship with God, and then the relationship with your partner is bonus. But you don't want to run to them first to be the answer to everything that you need, okay? They just can't. And it's a setup for expectation hangovers, as I like to call them, and a lot of disappointment. So don't expect them to be your BFF and put all of these expectations on them that are really impossible. That on the flip side, if you were to put yourself in their shoes with all these expectations being thrown at you, it would be so heavy, and you'd really just want to avoid that person. So think about that. Next one, number 5, before commenting, responding, having a conversation, lashing out, whatever's that, reacting, before any of that, repeat your own words out loud. Now, I know that I am a writer. I know that I'm a passionate person. And I know that some of the words that I say can be taken out of context, or they can hit different through somebody else's perspective. So what helps me is actually reading it out loud. Now, if I were to receive this message, how would I feel? How would I receive that? What is the tone of it? What is the intention behind it? What am I really driving home here? If that message landed in my inbox, how would I feel about it? How would I respond? Is that really what I'm trying to send here, or am I being too emotional in the moment? Or is that something that I need to sleep on before I even respond? Before commenting, repeat it out loud, because that will give you so much information about really if that's a good idea or not at all, okay? Now, number 6 is, remember, you don't just say how you feel, you show it. So I love you is probably one of the phrases that is so easily used and just thrown about, right? But as much as we can enjoy hearing that, we really need to see it to believe it. And I know that sometimes that feels harsh, but it's real, right? Like what you do, how you show up, how you act reveals so much more about you than what you say. So super, super important to actually show what it is that you're about. So if you're about harmony, why are you the one that's always starting arguments or asking these really interrogating questions that don't bring harmony, right? Or if you are about collaboration, how come you don't involve your partner in the things that matter to you and you don't keep them updated? Just things, right? I think we're on 6. Don't be afraid to talk about money. This is huge, specifically if you're building a life with somebody. You really want to be able to talk about money and how that's managed and how you steward it. It is part of your call. It is part of your purpose, and you can do a lot of beautiful, wonderful things with money. So it's really, really important that you talk about investments, how you're going to manage that money, all of it. Again, with this one specifically too, talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. If you have bad spending habits, what is the solution to avoid these bad habits, right? Or if you're not good at managing money, is that something that your partner is ready to take on, right? And help you with versus just expecting them to do that. It's really, really important that you're talking about it. Next one is number 7, I believe. Choose to love your partner every day. Now, in the world with in the kingdom, with the kingdom mindset, really what you're learning to do is die to yourself daily. You're dying to these selfish desires. You're dying to these temptations, and you're choosing to serve. You're choosing to love. You're choosing to bless. You're choosing to add value. You're choosing to contribute. It's not just, you make me happy. You give me what I need. You give me what I'm expecting, right? You need to do this. Think about it. A lot of times we're trying to like change, morph, and fix a person. And that's when things get really, really out of whack. Can you love them? You can't change them. So can you love them? Will you choose to love them today? What does that look like? What is your next step to do that? If you are actively focusing on loving a person, it will change the dynamic and just the environment or the atmosphere, your relationship culture completely. Okay. Number 8 is fight in a productive way. So this is really powerful. I think fighting is not good, bad, right, or wrong. It's actually really productive if it's done right and if it's done well. Meaning you're not always going to agree, but can two walk together unless they agree? That's where this can get out of context. So you can have a similar mission, but you can have different ways about getting to the same destination, okay? And you can talk and voice concerns, but you've got to be specific about it. You don't want to point blame. You don't want to condemn. You don't want to criticize. That's not productive. So how can you still honor and respect a person and really own your position? So use a lot of I statements, how I am feeling, what this made me think. This is why I came to this conclusion, right? The way that played out made me feel, right? So it's not pointing or criticizing, but there's a lot of ownership. That is way more productive than coming up with excuses or blaming or projecting or all that other stuff that can go on. Okay. Next one, you can, depending on this is number 9, you can, depending on who you surround yourself with, so take this with a grain of salt, but you can also ask your friends for advice. But I would be careful because sometimes, you have friends that you're asking relationship advice and maybe they've had several failed relationships. Is that really who you want relationship advice from, right? What's really helpful is when you have somebody that's genuinely and actively modeling what it is that you're attempting to walk out, or maybe they're further along the path. A mentor, a spiritual covering, really, really important. That would be a great person to go to, or even a coach. Having this outside person to really help you work through what you're going through, that's sometimes helpful because sometimes it's too much just for you and your partner to be hashing things out all the time. So having that outlet is really, really helpful. So those are a couple of things that I would say to make sure that you can have a different relationship culture. And so you can also get past the representative, because a lot of times we throw up a representative when we don't feel like we can be ourselves. We don't feel confident or safe or secure within the context of a specific relationship. So if you can work these new habits, these new tools, if you can integrate them into your relationship, it will get you past the representative and it will get you to the real pretty quickly. So I hope this message blessed you. If you want to dive deeper into this self-mastery work, I have a 6-week course over on julianapage.com that you can check out. There are also coaching packages that can assist you really on any area of your life. But if relationship is a highlight for you, that is a really great option. So you can check out coaching packages over there as well. And if this message blessed you, make sure that you subscribe, and you can also copy the link and share it with a friend. All right, guys, until next time.